Inspector Michael Carter had worked for the Philadelphia Police Department for 19 years, the last 7 leading the Internal Affairs Division. At 41, he was responsible for investigating complaints of police misconduct, excessive force, corruption, and civil rights violations. His investigations had resulted in disciplinary actions ranging from retraining to termination for officers who violated department policy or broke the law. Michael took his role seriously. He believed most officers were dedicated professionals, but he also knew that bad officers who weren't held accountable destroyed public trust and endangered everyone. His investigations were thorough, fair, and focused on facts rather than protecting officers who deserved consequences. On a Thursday evening in November, Michael was driving home from headquarters after working late on a use-of-force investigation. It was 10:30 p.m. and the streets were quiet. He drove his personal vehicle, a well-maintained Audi sedan he'd purchased 3 years ago. He wasn't in uniform and wasn't on duty, just heading home after a long day. Michael was driving through a middle-class neighborhood in northeast Philadelphia when he noticed a patrol car behind him. The car followed him for several blocks without activating lights or indicating a traffic stop. Michael checked his speed, confirmed he was within the limit, verified his registration sticker was current, and ensured all vehicle lights were functioning. There was no legitimate reason for a traffic stop. The patrol car's lights suddenly activated, flashing red and blue with the spotlight illuminating Michael's vehicle. He sighed, already knowing what was about to happen. He'd experienced this before, the phenomenon known as driving while black, where officers stopped black drivers without legitimate cause based on assumptions and stereotypes. Michael pulled over safely, put his car in park, turned off the engine, and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel. He knew the script. Stay calm, be respectful, document everything, and survive the encounter. As an internal affairs inspector, he understood police procedures and his rights. He also understood that knowledge didn't protect him from officers who saw his skin color before anything else. The officer approached from the driver's side with flashlight in hand, shining it directly into Michael's face in a way designed to disorient and intimidate. Michael kept his hands on the wheel and waited for the officer to speak. License and registration. The command was curt, without the typical explanation of why the stop occurred. Michael responded calmly. "Officer, can you tell me why you pulled me over?" "License and registration. Now, I'm happy to provide those documents. I'm asking what traffic violation I committed that justifies this stop." The officer, whose nameplate identified him as B. Kozlowski, leaned closer to the window. "You were driving suspiciously, changing speeds, looking around like you were lost or casing houses. I have reasonable suspicion to investigate possible criminal activity." Michael hadn't changed speeds or behaved suspiciously. He'd driven normally on a direct route home. Kozlowski's description was fabricated justification for a stop that had no legitimate basis. "Officer Kozlowski, I was driving home from work at a constant legal speed. I made no erratic movements and committed no traffic violations. This appears to be a pretextual stop." Kozlowski's expression hardened. "Are you refusing to provide identification?" "I'm not refusing. I'm exercising my right to understand the legal basis for this stop before complying with demands. The legal basis is I'm a police officer conducting an investigation and you're required to identify yourself. Now give me your license and registration or I'll add failure to comply to the charges." "What charges? You've cited no violation." Kozlowski's hand moved to his service weapon, not drawing it but resting on the grip in a threatening gesture. "Step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands where I can see them." Michael felt his heart rate increase but maintained calm. This was escalating in exactly the way that endangered black drivers in encounters with aggressive officers. He needed to de-escalate while protecting his rights and documenting everything for potential investigation. "Officer, I'm going to reach for my wallet which contains my identification. It's in my inside jacket pocket. I'm informing you of my movements to avoid any misunderstanding." I said, "Step out of the vehicle. Do it now." Michael had a dashboard camera in his vehicle that recorded traffic stops. He also had his phone mounted on a holder with audio recording activated. Everything Kozlowski said and did was being documented. "Officer Kozlowski, I'm complying with your order. I'm opening my door slowly and stepping out with my hands visible." Michael opened the door carefully and stepped out of his vehicle. Kozlowski immediately grabbed his arm and spun him around, pushing him against the car with unnecessary force. "Hands on the vehicle. Spread your legs." Kozlowski conducted an aggressive pat-down search, going far beyond what was necessary to check for weapons. When he found Michael's wallet, he pulled it out roughly. "What do we have here? Expensive car, nice clothes, driving through a neighborhood late at night. What are you doing in this area? I live 6 blocks from here. I'm driving home from work." Kozlowski opened the wallet and found Michael's driver's license along with his Philadelphia Police Department credentials, identifying him as Inspector Michael Carter, Internal Affairs Division. The change in Kozlowski's demeanor was instant and dramatic. The aggressive confidence disappeared, replaced by uncertainty and alarm. "You're a cop. I'm an internal affairs inspector. I've been an officer for 19 years, and I lead the division that investigates police misconduct. And you just conducted an illegal traffic stop, searched me without probable cause, used excessive force during the pat-down, and failed to provide any legitimate justification for this encounter." Kozlowski's face went pale in the flashing lights from his patrol car. "Inspector Carter, I didn't know who you were. This was a routine traffic stop based on suspicious behavior." "There was no suspicious behavior. You pulled me over because you saw a black man in an expensive car and made assumptions. Then you escalated the encounter with demands, threats, and physical aggression rather than treating me with the basic respect every citizen deserves. I was following proper procedure for a suspicious vehicle investigation. There's no such thing as a suspicious vehicle investigation without articulable facts supporting reasonable suspicion. You cited changing speeds and looking around, neither of which occurred. You fabricated justification for a stop that was based on racial profiling." Kozlowski attempted to salvage the situation. "Inspector, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just trying to do my job keeping the neighborhood safe. If my communication wasn't clear, I apologize. We can end this stop right here. The stop should never have begun, and ending it now doesn't erase what you did. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. You used your position as an officer to intimidate and threaten a citizen who'd committed no violation. You put your hand on your weapon in a threatening manner during a routine encounter. All of that is captured on my dashboard camera and my phone recording." Kozlowski's alarm intensified. "You recorded this?" "Yes. Everything from the moment you activated your lights. Your illegal stop, your failure to provide justification, your threats, your excessive force during the search, all documented. Inspector Carter, please, I've been on the force for 18 years. I have a family. I made a mistake, but this doesn't need to become an official thing. Can we just move past it?" Michael felt zero sympathy. "Officer Kozlowski, how many other drivers have you stopped like this? How many other black men have you pulled over without cause, searched illegally, and threatened? How many didn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back so you got away with it? I don't profile people. I treat everyone fairly. You just demonstrated exactly the opposite. You stopped me for driving while black. You escalated immediately to demands and threats. You searched me without legal basis. If I hadn't been an internal affairs inspector, would you have arrested me on fabricated charges, planted evidence, used force and claimed I resisted? I would never do those things. Maybe not tonight because I identified myself, but the willingness was there, the aggressive approach, the threats, the excessive force during a simple pat-down. Those are precursors to worse misconduct when officers think they can act without accountability." Michael got back in his vehicle. "You'll be hearing from Internal Affairs. Expect to be contacted for an interview regarding this incident, and expect your body camera footage to be subpoenaed along with your patrol car camera. This interaction is going to be investigated thoroughly." Kozlowski stood on the street looking stricken as Michael drove away. When Michael arrived home, he immediately began documenting the incident in comprehensive detail. He noted the time and location of the stop, Kozlowski's statements, his actions, the lack of any traffic violation or suspicious behavior, and his own compliance throughout the encounter despite the illegal nature of the stop. He downloaded the video from his dashboard camera and the audio from his phone. The recordings were clear and damning. They showed Kozlowski pulling him over without cause, refusing to explain the stop, making threats, conducting an illegal search, and only changing his behavior when he discovered Michael's identity. The next morning, Michael filed an official complaint against Officer Brian Kozlowski. Despite being the head of Internal Affairs, he didn't investigate the case himself to avoid any appearance of bias or retaliation. He assigned the investigation to his deputy inspector and provided his documentation as evidence. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was overwhelming. Kozlowski's body camera footage, his patrol car camera, and Michael's recordings all told the same story. Kozlowski had conducted a traffic stop without reasonable suspicion, failed to articulate any legitimate basis for the stop, escalated the encounter aggressively, and searched Michael without probable cause. The investigation also revealed Kozlowski's history. Over 18 years, he'd received multiple complaints about aggressive behavior, racial profiling, and excessive force. Most complaints had been classified as unfounded or not sustained because they lacked video evidence and came down to the complainant's word against Kozlowski's word. The department had consistently sided with Kozlowski, but Internal Affairs pulled data on Kozlowski's traffic stops and found troubling patterns. Over the past 5 years, 68% of his traffic stops involved black drivers, despite his patrol area being only 32% black. His stops of black drivers were twice as likely to result in vehicle searches compared to stops of white drivers, and his use of force reports involved black subjects at rates far exceeding their representation in his total enforcement actions. The pattern revealed systematic racial profiling and discriminatory policing that had been occurring for years without consequences. The Internal Affairs investigation concluded that Kozlowski had violated multiple department policies, including conducting stops without reasonable suspicion, failing to treat citizens with respect and professionalism, using excessive force during searches, and engaging in racial profiling. The investigation recommended termination. Police Commissioner Janet Rodriguez reviewed the findings and agreed with the recommendation. Kozlowski was terminated from the Philadelphia Police Department 32 days after he pulled over Inspector Carter. Kozlowski appealed his termination through the police union, arguing that his traffic stop was legitimate and that he'd treated Inspector Carter professionally. The appeal hearing included presentation of all video evidence, which contradicted Kozlowski's claims completely. The arbitrator upheld the termination, ruling that Kozlowski's conduct violated both department policy and constitutional law, that his pattern of discriminatory policing warranted termination regardless of the specific incident with Inspector Carter, and that his lack of candor during the investigation demonstrated he wasn't suitable for continued employment as a police officer. The case didn't end with termination. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office reviewed the incident and charged Kozlowski with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal civil rights violation. The charge alleged that Kozlowski had used his authority as a police officer to conduct an illegal search and seizure based on racial bias. Kozlowski pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, along with permanent prohibition from working in law enforcement. The case generated significant media coverage. Local and national news outlets covered the story of the Internal Affairs inspector who'd been racially profiled by one of his own officers. Civil rights organizations held press conferences, highlighting how Michael's experience demonstrated that even police executives weren't safe from discriminatory policing, making clear that regular citizens faced even worse treatment. The case also sparked internal reforms within the Philadelphia Police Department. Commissioner Rodriguez implemented mandatory body cameras for all officers with discipline for failing to activate them. She revised traffic stop policies to require officers to inform drivers of the reason for stops before demanding identification. She established an early warning system to identify officers with patterns of discriminatory stops before those patterns escalated to serious misconduct. 5 years after the incident, Michael was promoted to Deputy Police Commissioner overseeing all internal affairs, training, and professional standards. In that role, he implemented comprehensive reforms addressing racial profiling, excessive force, and accountability. In speeches and interviews, Michael often referenced his experience with Kozlowski to illustrate the persistence of racial bias in policing. When Officer Kozlowski pulled me over that night, he saw a black man in a nice car and made immediate assumptions about criminality. He didn't see a 19-year police veteran, an internal affairs inspector, or a citizen with rights. He saw a black man he could stop, search, and intimidate without consequence. He was wrong about the consequences, but he was right that he'd done it to countless other black drivers who didn't have the power to hold him accountable. Michael continued, I had video evidence, knowledge of my rights, credentials that gave me credibility and authority within the department. Most people Kozlowski stopped didn't have those advantages. They experienced the same illegal stops, the same threats, the same searches, but they couldn't prove it or couldn't get anyone to take their complaints seriously. Kozlowski had 18 years of complaints that were dismissed because the department chose to believe him over the people he victimized. My experience changed that because I couldn't be dismissed. But the lesson isn't that profiling is only wrong when the victim has power. It's that profiling is always wrong, and we need systems that hold officers accountable even when their victims are regular citizens, without credentials or cameras. 10 years after the incident, Michael was appointed Police Commissioner of Philadelphia, the first black commissioner in the department's history. He used his platform to continue reforms addressing racial bias, improving community trust, and ensuring accountability for officer misconduct. Brian Kozlowski completed his federal prison sentence and was released with a felony record that made employment difficult. He never worked in law enforcement again and struggled with the consequences of his discriminatory conduct.
In a later interview with a criminal justice reform publication, Kozlowski offered reflection that seemed genuine, but couldn't undo the harm he'd caused over 18 years. When I pulled over Inspector Carter that night, I saw a black man in an expensive car late at night, and I assumed he was doing something wrong. I didn't base that assumption on any actual behavior. I based it on racial stereotypes I'd internalized over years of policing. I thought I was doing good police work by being suspicious of people who didn't fit my assumptions about who belonged in certain neighborhoods. I found out that the person I profiled was an internal affairs inspector who had the knowledge, evidence, and authority to hold me accountable. If he'd been a regular citizen, I probably would have gotten away with it, like I'd gotten away with it countless times before. That's the real problem. Not that I profiled someone powerful, but that I'd been profiling people for years, and the department let me get away with it, until I finally targeted someone who could fight back. The story became a case study in police academies and civil rights training. The patrol officer who racially profiled his own department's internal affairs inspector. It illustrated how racial bias in policing affected even those within law enforcement, how video evidence could document misconduct that would otherwise be denied, and how accountability required systems that believed complaints from community members even when they lacked official credentials. And in Philadelphia, the reforms implemented after Kozlowski's termination helped reduce discriminatory policing, though challenges remained. Traffic stop data showed declining racial disparities. Use of force incidents decreased. Community trust in police, while still fragile, improved incrementally. Michael Carter had been driving home from work when an officer pulled him over, based solely on the color of his skin. That officer thought he was dealing with someone he could intimidate and dismiss. He didn't know he was profiling the one person in the department with authority to investigate, document, and prosecute his misconduct. That error in judgment cost Kozlowski his career and his freedom. But more importantly, it exposed patterns of discrimination that had harmed countless other black drivers and sparked reforms that would protect future citizens from similar treatment. That was the consequence of racial profiling in policing. Not just individual career destruction when targeting the wrong person, but systemic accountability that ensured police officers couldn't violate civil rights without facing serious consequences, regardless of whether their victim had power and credentials or was simply a citizen deserving of constitutional protections.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.